Now imagine this. You live in the San Francisco Bay, California. The year is 1968. Maybe you just got home from work. Maybe you're cooking dinner. I mean, to be fair, there wasn't really a lot to do back then. There was no TikTok. There was no Fortnite. It really was just making food and maybe touching grass. But during that time, you might be unaware that that neighborhood will live in absolute fear for the rest of your life, never knowing that the day you leave your house might potentially be the last. Now, this is about the Zodiac Killer. This has been a phenomenon since the late 60s. Loads of people have tried to put together the Zodiac game end situation. God, I hate how cooked modern vocabulary is. It's worse than like doublethink in 1984. Now, obviously, the Zodiac Killer is one of the biggest unsolved mysteries of our time. I mean, it's basically up there with Jack the Ripper doing an insane amount of game ends, but no one actually found out who the Zodiac Killer was. Seriously, like the top 3 people of all time that did something and got away with it was probably DB Cooper when he hijacked a plane and parachuted out, Jack the Ripper doing a massive amount of game ends in the streets of London, and then obviously the Zodiac Killer as well. I mean, there was even like a Zodiac Killer film with Robert Downey Jr. Okay, I know I'm talking about very serious business here about the Zodiac Killer situation, but this video just came up in my recommended of like Mr. Beast.
I've made a severe and continuous lapse in my judgment. And I don't
now, even though the Zodiac Killer was never officially identified, there were 5 official confirmed victims. And these ranged from 1968 to 1969, so basically just a year. Now, the first couple of game ends that were committed was a young couple, Betty Lou Jensen, who was 16, and David Faraday, who was 17. Now, I did mention the 2007 film briefly, and because of the, just no one knowing who the Zodiac Killer was, one really cool thing they did in that film is every time the Zodiac Killer appears, obviously he's fully covered up, but he's always played by a different actor, mostly to keep his actual identity ambiguous, but also because of the fact that, there were so many killings that people thought it could have actually been a group of people at one point. Now, after game ending the young couple, he actually didn't commit any more murders for the rest of the year, but then he would go on to murder 2 more pairs of couples and a taxi driver. Now, in these cases, both of the men survived the attacks, that being Michael Renault Mageau and Brian Calvin Hartnell. After the killing of a single taxi driver, it seemed that the killings might have actually stopped. But even though the killings did stop, that wouldn't actually be the end of him basically taunting law enforcement. Now, back then in the 60s, it was really easy to actually kill someone in like a back-end town and get away with it, mostly because like DNA testing wasn't even really properly used until like the 80s. And, there was like, no, everyone's using like credit cards now. Back then it was all cash. It was really easy to stay off the grid as opposed to how regulated and surveillanced everything is now. But one of the reasons why the Zodiac Killer stood out is because they never managed to ID him, and more importantly, all the ciphers that he would send to news stations and police. Many people that are serial killers tend to, live covertly. They don't want to get caught. A lot of them do get a rush from, like, for example, returning to the scene of the crime. But he really went the next step by basically taunting them, being like, "You're never going to catch me, Lamau." And it's funny as well because I mentioned Jack the Ripper at the beginning of the video, who was a notorious serial killer in London in the 1800s, but he would do the same thing. He would send letters to the police basically mocking them that, "Haha, you're not going to catch me, Lamau." Now, there are obviously game theories that Jack the Ripper never wrote these letters. It was just some like obsessed stalker or something basically trying to like troll the police a little bit too much. He would handwrite the letters though regardless, but what the Zodiac Killer would do is basically send a bunch of codes and ciphers that they had to break down themselves, and all the time spent doing that is probably one of the reasons why he became so infamous. And these ciphers weren't just deceptive trolling, because some of them were actually useful, leading law enforcement to the scenes where he would commit the murders. Included among the letters were 4 ciphers or cryptograms, the first of which was sent in 3 parts to 3 Bay Area newspapers in July 1969. Known as the 408 cipher for the number of characters it contained, it was soon decoded by a pair of private citizens. Its messages stated in part that "I like killing people because it is so much fun." Another cipher, the 340 cipher, mailed to the San Francisco Chronicle in November 1969, was finally decoded in 2020 by a team of 3 amateur code breakers. Its message began, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me." Now, keep in mind that this has been an ongoing investigation for 65 years. And even though it's such an old case, there's like new little bits of information that keep cropping up like every other month or so. Now, in the letters, he claims to have game ended around 37 people, which would be a victory royale, but the police could only pin him on around 4 attacks. Now, the biggest question is, What was his motive? Why did he stop? Because a lot of serial killers, they really do keep going until they get caught. They get too greedy. They get too complacent. And the second question there, why did he stop? It really doesn't have a clear answer. Very few people that are serial killers end up going on to live normal lives because they always have that urge to keep doing it. He explained that he was killing victims to collect them as his personal slaves in the afterlife. Each letter also included 1/3 of a 408 symbol cryptogram, which the killer claimed contained his identity. Okay, so we have the first question answered, the reason behind the killings. A lot of people have like an urge. Sometimes it might even be like a sexual fetish or something. But, you know, he was basically just delusional and thought that he was trying to get slaves in the afterlife. But to answer the second question, why he stopped, we probably need to try and find out this guy's identity. Now, even though no one actually confirmed who the Zodiac killer is, there have been so many suspects. Like, imagine that scene with the usual suspects and you got like Kevin Spacey and he's actually the bad guy in the film, spoiler alert, and then he also went on to do a bunch of other bad things, allegedly. Now, one of the more notable suspects here is Arthur Lee Allen. He was basically one of the only men that was named by police as an actual tangible suspect. But even with his name being put out there, it was all kind of circumstantial and it never really got pursued. Now, one of the detectives on the case, Dave Toschi, always felt that Allen was actually the Zodiac killer. Now, that film I keep mentioning, Zodiac, that came out in 2007, which has a lot of Avengers actors in it. I mean, it even has Mark Ruffalo that plays the Hulk. He actually plays Toschi in the film and voices the detective's thoughts. If you get into who these cops were, you realize how they have to take their hunches, their personal beliefs out of it. Dave Toschi told me, as soon as that guy walked in the door, I knew it was him. He was sure he had him, but he never had a solid piece of evidence, so he had to keep investigating every other lead. Also, funny little side note, imagine a world where we didn't have Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk and it was Edward Norton. You know how Edward Norton was the Hulk back in like 2003 or something, but he basically left because he didn't want to be in like, you know, AAA Hollywood blockbusters anymore. He wanted to do like more indie films. If he stayed, we would still have Edward Norton in the Avengers, and I think that would be... it would be very different. So the main reason they moved on from Allen is mostly because DNA didn't really match up. Also, the handwriting that Allen had compared to the Zodiac killer wasn't similar at all. Now, one of the previous victims, Michael, did actually identify Allen as the man who shot him in the picture lineup, but that was countered by other accounts basically saying that this guy, Allen, he doesn't sound like the Zodiac killer, or he was too round. So he literally got away with it because he was too fat. In July 1992, Michael Mageau identified Allen as the man who shot him in 1969 from a photo lineup, saying, "That's him. That's the man who shot me." However, police officer Donald Fook, who is that how you say it? Fook? Who is speculated to have seen the Zodiac fleeing from the Stein killing, said in the 2007 documentary his name was Arthur Lee Allen, that Allen weighed around 100 pounds more than the man he saw, adding that his face was too round. Nancy Slover, who received the call from the Zodiac in the aftermath of the Mageau-Ferrin shooting, said that Allen did not sound like the man on the phone. So that was pretty much one of the only names that they had in the police database for the Zodiac killer, but that was a while ago. You know, Zodiac killer fell off. Let's fast forward now to current year 2024. And compared to back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, now it's supercharged. Like every third TikTok you see, you'll have someone claim that their uncle was the Zodiac killer. Mostly because as well as more and more people get access to social media, the dregs of society slowly rise up and people just can talk random shit online and people will believe it as fact. However, there was one TikTok talking about the Zodiac killer uploaded by a guy called Jay, and he just posted this and it blew up.
I typed in my grandpa's name on Google the other day, and to my fucking surprise, internet sleuths have been throwing my grandpa's name around for years, connecting him as the Zodiac motherfucking killer. As you can see here in all these pictures on the screen somewhere, that it looks exactly like my grandpa. Let's talk about it. My grandpa was a Vallejo police officer. Yes, the same area where the Zodiac killer's fucking killings took place. Darlene Farron and her boyfriend Mike or Matt, forgot the fucking guy's name, were driving around Vallejo one night, a night that my grandfather happened to be on duty, driving an unmarked police car and wearing plain clothes. Mike, who ended up surviving the shooting, said that they were being followed around by this car all night in Vallejo before they pulled into Blue Rock Springs. They said when they parked, the car pulled in, a man hopped out of the car, and Darlene, the girl who passed away, said, "Oh my God, that's Richard. He's gonna kill us both. So this guy in her passenger seat is one of her many boyfriends, and it was well known by her friend group that she was dating a Vallejo cop, although she never told them the name. She had a painting party at her house a few weeks before her murder, and it was said that my grandfather, Richard Hoffman, showed up uninvited, and she told her circle of friends that she is scared to death of him, and he was not invited there. My grandpa denies these claims. He says he never laid eyes on her, but then later goes on to say, I know that she worked at a restaurant locally here in Vallejo. Right before they got shot, she said, that's Richard, he's gonna kill us both. My grandpa's name is fucking Richard Hoffman. In a letter that the Zodiac wrote, and my grandpa's police reports, and also this poem that I'm gonna talk about later, my grandpa spells the word until wrong. He spells it wrong. He puts 2 L's at the end. Where in multiple letters of the Zodiac wrote, he also spells until with 2 L's at the motherfucking end. Well, let's talk about the Sherry Bates murder that took place a couple years before the Darlene Ferrin murder. She was in a library doing her homework. She had just moved from Nebraska. Nebraska, why do I mention that? Because my grandpa lived in Nebraska. My mother, biological mother, was born in Nebraska. My grandpa was also in the Navy. Sherry Bates' brother was also in the Navy. This is weird, right? It's all coming together. Well, this murder took place. She was at the library studying one night. She leaves and gets shot up, where they found a poem handwritten underneath a motherfucking desk. And forensic analysis and handwriting analysis say that is the exact writings of the Zodiac. And they say that this is possibly the first killing that the Zodiac ever did. Well, this letter was initialed RH at the very bottom. RH, Richard Hoffman. They also say that the crime scene was tampered with. Why did Darlene's family get a call that she was shot before the cops even knew about it? And that call was placed by a payphone outside of Vallejo Police Department. Someone tell me that. And my grandpa was first on scene to that shooting. And later it was revealed that that scene was tampered with. My grandpa showed up on scene within 5 minutes of the shooting being reported. He sent away the officers that responded with him. Who sends away responding officers on a possible double murder?
Now, this TikTok blew up, getting well over 10 million views, which is about 1,000 views on YouTube. Every TikTok, if you go on this guy's account, you will see that, oh my God, I struck gold with that TikTok. So every other TikTok he's made since is basically just about the Zodiac killer.
My grandpa is the Zodiac killer. Update.
Now, a lot of people look deeper into this TikTok, and you can actually see some small details that do surprisingly line up. Like, for example, the biggest one being the spelling of the letter with 2 L's. Now, Jay has posted multiple videos. Like I said, he has been milking this trend. He's been milking this trend more than people milking the downfall of Mr. Beast. I want to give a shout out to the commentary channel Pegasus. No hate towards the guy at all, but he has been getting that bag with the Mr. Beast videos. And I do like as well the thumbnails he uses is just the same image of Jimmy, but he'll like flip the image. I do love with YouTubers, like no matter where you are on the scale, like just starting out or a very successful channel with tens of millions of views, when you get one banger, you will cling to it for dear life using the same metadata over and over again. I've been incredibly guilty of that myself, by the way. Why do you think on the main channel every video is like le saddest le video game you have never played? With the amount of TikToks this Jay guy has done milking the Zodiac killer, he basically is going to have his own Netflix documentary in about 2 months. So the comparison claims are pretty uncanny. These sketches actually do look like him, to be fair. And again, it is one of those situations where it's like there isn't one big piece of evidence that's like, oh my God, we've got him, but it's like loads of little things that do kind of slowly add up. Now, the most recent video, he basically had to stop talking about it, saying that he's not going to post about it anymore because certain opportunities are arising for him. Most likely Netflix are probably reaching out to him to do like a 9-part series. I can't wait for that series because Netflix stretches out documentaries more than YouTubers stretch a video out to 8 minutes. If they do a 4-part series, part 1 will probably be talking about the truck the guy sat in when making the TikTok videos. Part 2 will probably be talking about the phone model he's been using to broadcast his message to the world. The 3rd part will probably be talking about his KD on Fortnite, and then the 4th part will probably actually talk about the Zodiac killer. Now, no hate to the guy at all. He's getting that bag. I think it's based. I mean, he's probably someone that hasn't really known fame at all in his life, and now he's being invited all over the place to basically talk about the Zodiac killer. But funnily enough, there was actually a similar situation with a guy called Gary Francis Post, and he was named after a group called the Case Breakers, combed through a lot of evidence and basically landed on this name. In 2021, a civilian volunteer group called the Case Breakers announced they had identified Gary Francis Post as the elusive Zodiac killer through a combination of evidence involving shell cartridges, photos, fingerprints, cryptic writings, and DNA harvested from his old clothing and a blood relative. Although outlets like the New York Post were quick to declare Gary Francis Post the real Zodiac killer, after the Casebreakers announcement in 2021, the FBI insists that their investigations of the Zodiac killer remain open. Many have pointed to the lack of hard evidence in the Casebreakers' claims. The Casebreakers say they know Gary Francis Post was the Zodiac killer because of DNA evidence obtained from a hiking mat and blood relative, as well as a tip from an FBI agent. Other clues include the Zodiac killer was believed to have forehead scars. Post had forehead scars as well. The Zodiac killer and Post allegedly shared the same shoe size. Post lived near the areas where the murders occurred and owned firearms. Now, many people have actually taken Gary to like be their guy, but the case was basically never closed. I mean, maybe even, you know, former policeman Richard Hoffman could actually be the Zodiac killer. I mean, having someone in law enforcement that is a Zodiac killer, that would, you know, make a lot of sense, because people that work in the police, they know how to manipulate people. I mean, JCS, for example, did a very good deep dive into a murderer years ago. This was a woman who worked in law enforcement, and because she worked with the police, she knew how to basically beat the interrogations.
Jeez.
The words gosh, God, gee are exclamatory remarks used to express surprise or strong emotion. You will see them used continuously throughout this interrogation, which is the suspect trying to insinuate a vague memory due to a lack of contemplation on the subject matter. She's trying to emit the impression that she would have had no reason to give any further thought to John or anything related to John, since they stopped seeing each other over 2 decades ago.
You know.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you do look at the comparisons side by side, they do look pretty close. Like they could possibly match. But, you know, we'll wait until we see this guy on the Theo Von podcast, where Theo Von talks about... I have no idea what that guy talks about half the time. I swear he's just like smoking crack.
Is outer space gay or straight?
Is outer space gay or straight? Practically everything we see and measure in space, not only objects, but temperature, size, density, is on a spectrum. Density.
It's just a spectrum, right, bro? Get off your fucking knees.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. Subscribe to the channel, and I will expose the real Zodiac killer.